Welcome, everybody. This is David Marks representing the ATD NYC Webinar Committee. Very happy to have you all here for this webinar. And I'm going to just very quickly go over a basic agenda for what our expectations are going to be, which are, in a moment, we're going to introduce our presenter, Clive. He is going to do his presentation. In terms of questions, Clive is going to address questions from the chat box as they pop up. We'll be keeping track following his presentation. So if you do have a question, put it in the chat box. We are going to get to that at the end of the presentation. And if it turns out we don't have enough time to cover every single question, you are going to have access to Clive's LinkedIn information and also his email address. So if there are remaining questions, he's very happy to have you reach out and contact him that way. So after the presentation, there will be a survey that will be sent to you. We love the feedback, so please complete that when it's sent. And here is Angela Wright, the director of the ATD NYC Coaching Center of Excellence, to introduce Clive. Take it away, Angela.
Thank you, David. Before I introduce Clive, I'd just like to say a warm welcome to all the ATD and ICF members joining this event. And also for those of you collecting ICF continuing education units, there'll be a password posted in the chat box at both the start and towards the end of the webinar. You'll need these passwords to claim your certificate, and you must do so within the next 48 hours. So Clive's asked me to keep his introduction very brief, and I know that you can all read his amazing bio. So in short, Clive is an executive leadership and career coach. He also facilitates global workshops focused on coaching and positive psychology. He's a lecturer, author, sought-after speaker who lives and breathes coaching and positive psychology. I should also mention that Clive presented a similar session in New York last year and is back today by popular demand. So thank you, Clive.
You're very welcome, Angela. You're very welcome. And thanks to you and to David for this opportunity to be talking to you tonight from London. So I'm in a very hot and sticky London. It's about 25 degrees here, which is unheard of. But I'm cool and I'm collected and I'm ready to go. So I'm going to be sharing with you some of my journey and my ideas and my thinking around positive psychology coaching. And my title is about navigating professional and personal success. And you'll see there's a little bit of a nautical theme to my talk tonight, which will become apparent towards the end as to why I've chosen that sort of theme. So I wanted to just sort of give you a bit of a rundown as to my journey, my voyage, if you like, so far, because I do think it's really relevant to what I'm going to talk about tonight. I had a career in education, which I sort of loved, and got into management and leadership, which I sort of didn't love quite so much. And around the year 2000, I had a bit of a pinnacle, if you like, of my career when I got to host the Queen, Her Majesty the Queen, in in Luton Borough Council, where I was working as head of community education and development. And in many ways, I was very successful in my work. I'd been promoted at a young age. I'd climbed the ladder. I had a huge responsibility, and I was doing some very important things. But I wasn't really feeling quite so good. I might have been doing well, but I certainly wasn't really feeling well. And very shortly after I had the honor of hosting the Queen in Luton, I actually made a decision to step away from that role and to take some time out, because I felt that was something which I needed to do. And what actually happened was I ended up traveling and ended up being offered an opportunity to teach at a university in Bangkok called Thammasat University. It was a wonderful place to work, working for the Thai government, so I didn't earn any money whatsoever. But it was very interesting working in Thai organizations, working with the students, teaching on postgraduate programs and undergraduate programs. And for me, it was a bit of an epiphany, because I suddenly find myself in a role where I didn't have to manage anybody anymore. And for me, I'd found that managing people really stressful. But I didn't actually necessarily want to be an educator. So I started to think about what had been the things in my career thus far that have really engaged and energized me. And actually, it was always the enabling, the capacity building, supporting, the growing, the developing of people rather than the managing of them. So it's prompted me to explore the idea of coaching, because I suddenly thought, well, actually, you know, what do they call this type of work that you could do, which would be about enabling and supporting people? So I got involved in coaching, did some initial training, did some initial practice when I was in Asia, and I absolutely loved it. And I thought, wow, I think I've actually found what I was born to do. But my challenge then was, how am I going to shift from having had an educational background into one where I could actually use coaching in a way that could be meaningful for organizations, for communities, and also possibly back in the education sector. So I transferred, if you like, transitioned from Asia to Australia. And I had the pleasure and the honor of studying a master's in organizational coaching at the University of Sydney. And to say that the year at University of Sydney changed my life would be an understatement. It was the most amazing year learning and studying about coaching psychology and positive psychology. And a particular person I always like to thank is Dr. Susie Green, because Susie Green introduced me to positive psychology in 2008, 10 years ago. And my life has changed completely in so many ways over the last 10 years. And so much of that has been down to what I learned and what I was introduced to through Susie Green. So that was a real pleasure. And I always really want to sort of be grateful for that opportunity and for the support that Susie gave me then, and as you'll see, continues to give me now. So having graduated 10 years ago, and this is an important point for me, I actually finished my course at Sydney University virtually 10 years ago to the day. I actually graduated in October 2008. So I've had 10 years of opportunity to go out into the world and practice my learning and apply my learning. And what I do today, as Angela said, is I'm an organizational coach. I work in executive and leadership coaching. I work in education. These are some amazing young people I've been working with in Taipei. This particular group of young people, this is the second year I work with them. You can see the energy palpably on their faces, which is wonderful. I also get to work within the corporate sector. I get to teach now, so I actually teach a lecture on the Masters of Applied Positive Psychology and Coaching Psychology at the University of East London, which is also a real pleasure. I got to work with Angela last year in New York with the ATD, which was also a real honor. And what I do, and this is an important point I want to make tonight, is the tip of an iceberg, as you'll see, but I graduated 10 years ago and I have not stopped learning since. Every year I choose to go to the world's leading conferences where the latest evidence-based for positive psychology and coaching is presented. So I'm meeting, hearing from, engaging with some of the world's top researchers in this space, which is so important. So I urge all of you to, if this is a starting point for you tonight, it will not be the end, that's for sure. And if you're on the journey already, and I'll find out a bit about that a little in a moment, there's always more to learn because so much is changing. I've just come back, in fact, from Budapest. I presented at the 9th European Conference on Positive Psychology 2 weeks ago, and I got to present with one of the schools again I've been working with the British International School in Budapest, which was fantastic. So really, also what I want to do tonight also is to make reference to some of the things I took away from that conference, which reinforce the whole aim around positive psychology coaching. So that's a bit of background in terms of why I'm here and why I'm actually so grateful and excited to have this opportunity to share some of my thinking with you. So what am I going to cover in the next sort of 45 minutes or so? I go back actually to my iceberg because I do want to reiterate that point, that what I'm going to cover off tonight is the tip of an enormous iceberg. It was so interesting when I studied with Susie. She would say to us at the time that, you know, she was so busy because she was trying to read every single paper there was about positive psychology. And then she acknowledged over the years that it was impossible to do that because the amount of research, the number of peer-reviewed papers has increased exponentially over the last period of time. There's so much research, and all I can really do tonight is touch on a tip for you and hopefully excite your interest to learn more. Okay, so I'm going to talk about optimal functioning. I'm going to just talk a little bit about what positive psychology is. I want to talk about well-being and engagement because in the work I do as a coach, regardless of the context within which I'm working, the well-being and engagement framework that I share with you is fundamental to my work. Then I'm going to talk about PERMA-powered coaching, and I'm going to give you a few tips and a few tools that hopefully will be useful to you in your practice. And then I'm going to finish by sharing some lessons that I've learned along the way on my journey. What I want you to do, hopefully, is to learn, but I want you to reflect. And I do think it's important for you to think about what I share with you tonight. What does it mean for you? Some of you may be coaches, some of you may be HR people, some of you may be managers and leaders, but what am I sharing that's good for you? Because we have to start with ourselves first. Fundamentally, unless we're able to think about what does positive psychology, what does coaching psychology mean for me, it's very difficult for me to apply that to support other people. So, what is positive psychology? Well, fundamentally, positive psychology is called the science of what makes life worth living. It focuses on what works well. How is it that some people are able to get through life and all its challenges and opportunities and adversities and still manage to thrive despite all of those challenges, and some people actually don't manage quite so well? What is it that those people have? What resources do they draw upon? What resources do they build? What resources do they invest in that allow them to do that? So positive psychology explores that. The quote here from Martin Seligman, the founding father of positive psychology, talks about the purpose of positive psychology is to understand the human strengths that enable individuals, communities, and I would also add to that organizations to thrive. I'd like to just do a quick poll here, if that's okay, and just get a bit of an assessment of your experience of using positive psychology. So if you're able to just have a look at that question, do you currently use positive psychology as part of your coaching work? Always, often, sometimes, or never?
So the polls are open, everybody. We'd love to hear where you're coming from tonight. And we're not going to keep it open for too long, so now is the time. And hopefully everyone can see the poll. Since I don't see any answers yet, I am wondering if anyone...
Yep, I can see some answers, David.
Okay, good.
Yeah. So I'm seeing at the moment, I'm seeing 43% sometimes, 28% often, 23% always, which is really encouraging, and 8% never.
All right, excellent, good. I'm glad you can see it because for some reason I can't. But I'm glad you can, Clive. I'm going to go ahead and end the poll.
Okay, we'll end the poll. Okay, so the majority of the participants are saying that they sometimes apply positive psychology, but there's a significant number of you, probably over 50%, who always or often do, which is great. And again, I'm not here to teach you to suck eggs this evening. I'm really here to share with you my take on positive psychology and coaching psychology and my particular journey. So hopefully that's going to be useful for you. So moving on. The idea of flourishing. Now, the most simplistic way that we define flourishing these days is to feel good and function well. I alluded to my experience when I was in management and leadership, that actually, arguably, I was probably functioning quite well, but I wasn't feeling quite so good. And what we're looking to do is to support people to get that balance between the ability to feel good and function well. So to flourish means to live with an optimal range of human functioning. So we're looking at obviously trying to sort of be the best we can be under the circumstances that we're in. So human functioning and well-being, and one that connotes goodness, generativity, growth, and resilience. This is one of Fredrickson's definitions back in 2005. And I still think this one holds a great deal of meaning. We talk about resilience a lot. Life is challenging. Many people in the world are facing huge challenges as we speak. And our capacity to navigate through the challenges that life presents us is obviously paramount. But I just wanted to touch on another potential outcome of positive psychology coaching around mental toughness. I'm not planning to go into this as a construct this evening. There may be other opportunities in the future to do that, but it is an important construct. And my personal definition of mental toughness is that whereas resilience might be our ability to overcome adversity, to react in a functional way to challenges and things we face, mental toughness is that sense of stepping into challenge. It's not waiting for it to happen. It's around saying, hey, there is an opportunity. That opportunity may be very scary, it may be very difficult, but I'm going to go there anyway. And I think so much evidence is coming through now that when we invest in our capacity to flourish, we're also more likely to have that sense of mental toughness, to recognize challenge, see challenge as an opportunity, even if it's scary, to have a sense of control, to manage our emotions and manage our fears and anxieties, to have a sense of commitment, to work towards our goals and persist and not give up unless we really need to. And also the idea of confidence, that we're able to identify our resources and our strength, and support, get help, ask for help, assert ourselves, etc. So I think mental toughness is another area which is really important here, that certainly I hope we get to talk about more in the future. So, foundations for flourishing. Many of you, particularly those that are actually applying positive psychology more regularly, will be familiar, no doubt, with PERMA. PERMA is Seligman's sort of multi-dimensional model of well-being that suggests, and the evidence is really beginning to back this up, that in order to flourish, we need to be able to experience positive emotions. And I'll talk about all of these a bit more in a moment. We need to have a sense of engagement. We need to be active. We need to be working to our strengths. Flourishing people tend to have more positive relationships. This is not to say relationships are easy, because they're not, but investing in positive relationships can be very important for our capacity to flourish. Having a sense of meaning and purpose in life. What's my value? What's my worth? Why am I here? And a sense of accomplishment. Having goals, striving towards those goals. We know we're not always going to be successful in reaching our goals, but actually the idea of recognizing our progress and accomplishment is really important. And the interesting part here is that the misnomer of positive psychology, the myth of positive psychology, that it's all about being happy, clearly isn't true. That yes, it's important to experience positive emotion, but equally it's about being stretched, being challenged, investing in relationships, working to our values, and going out there and working to our goals. What's become very evident certainly over the last 2 or 3, maybe 4 years, is that our physical health certainly supports our capacity to flourish and to sustain our capacity to flourish. So a number of organizations and schools in particular have more recently been adding an H to PERMA. So we have the idea of health in terms of diet, exercise, nutrition, as also being very foundational to building our capacity to flourish. It's possible to measure your own PERMA by going to the permasurvey.com. This has been developed, this measurement, by Professor Peggy Kern, from the University of Melbourne. And it's free. It's available for individuals to go online and to use. And it's, from a coaching perspective, it's quite an interesting tool to work with a client to get some sense of where they are right now around their capacity to flourish. This is actually my PERMA profile. I've taken a while ago now, probably last year, and you'll see I'm scoring very high on meaning and purpose, pretty good on engagement, pretty good on positive emotions. Relationships and health were the 2 areas that I needed to be more mindful of, and actually I've been working on both of those quite purposefully over the last period of time. So I would like to think that if I redid that PERMA profile tomorrow, I would certainly see some increases in those 2 domains. So another quick poll. If you were to be coached yourself, and you were to be thinking about being coached against one of these 6 PERMA domains, what would be your priority for a coaching conversation? Would it be looking at your emotion, the level of positive emotions? Would it be your health, your engagement, relationships, meaning and purpose, or your sense of accomplishment?
And again, I hope everyone is sharing some answers. I am not able to see for some reason, but Clive, I hope you are.
Yes, I can see. Yep.
Okay, good. So,
Okay, so let's give it another 30 seconds.
another 30 seconds for everyone. So if you haven't had a chance to jump on the poll, let us know which one of these you find most helpful to be coached on. And we're going to close the polls in a few seconds. So last call to let us know.
Okay, so thank you for that. Okay, so that's interesting. So we've got 31% of our respondents have identified meaning and purpose as their priority for potential coaching on PERMA. We've got 24% focusing on accomplishment, 14% on positive emotions and health, and 7% on engagement. So I think that's just an interesting poll in terms of, that, and I think it's an interesting one that if we're attracting people to this talk who are interested in positive psychology and potentially looking to apply that, I guarantee that, if you're able to find a way of working in this field that works for you, your meaning and purpose, I'm sure, will increase. Your sense of meaning and purpose will increase. So, so thank you for that. That's a useful poll for me to reflect on. Okay, so let me move on because of time, particularly. Now, the challenge we have in society is that the research generally indicates to us that possibly only 20% of the population is likely to be flourishing. Now, this doesn't mean the other 80% are doing really badly. Most people are doing okay. They're doing pretty well. But getting into that space of feeling good and functioning well and finding ways to sustain that despite life's challenges can be quite difficult. And what we know, without going into too much detail, is that for many people, the waters are really stormy. We know that levels of stress, anxiety, depression are rising in terms of the adult and the young people's population. And, so there's lots of real challenges out there in terms of issues around anxiety and stress and distress in many different contexts. So despite the fact, arguably, we have so much more these days, so much more opportunity, so much more wealth, etc., levels of stress and anxiety are rising. And that's a big concern for many people. What causes that? All sorts of things. We could have a huge long list. I wanted to focus a little bit about work, but this would be equally applicable probably for school. And I asked many people in my workshops and in my coaching about what sort of issues get in the way of your capacity to flourish. And I get this long list of longer hours, increased demands, there's so much change going on. Some people embrace change, some people find change really challenging, conflict, targets, obviously the fact that people are experiencing more stress. And then we get the idea of absenteeism and presenteeism. Now, making assumptions that many of you will understand what presenteeism is, but I just wanted to ask a quick question. If you think about your organizations that you work in, that you come from, how many people are working in your organization? Just think about the answer to that, because the answer is probably about half of them. Haha, it's a joke. But it's true, isn't it? Because we know that levels of engagement at work, levels of engagement at school vary hugely. I can go into a school, I can go into an organization where it's very clear that many people within that community, that organization, are engaged and they're thriving and they're responding to challenges. I could go into other environments and we actually know that very few people will be highly engaged. And so many things get in the way of our capacity to be engaged at work. Negative issues going on, change, personal problems, questioning why I'm here. People actually, I work with people regularly in career transition, and they reflect on the last 20 years of their career and say some of it was good, but the last 5 or 10 years, why am I even here? I'm not sure why I ever got into this in the first place. Obviously, our health can have an impact. People actually not taking time off when they need to. But one I see a great deal is this one, where I see people who are really passionate, who are loyal, who are, really, who are very much wanting to make a real impact in their work. They do have a calling, if you like. They actually get exhausted and burnt out. And this leads me into the well-being and engagement framework. Tony Grant introduced this to me back in 2007, and it just absolutely resonated with me when I was first introduced to it. We've got high levels of mental health at the top, high levels of engagement and goal striving on the right-hand side, lower levels of mental health and lower levels of engagement and goal striving at the lower matrix and on the left-hand side. So in this lower left-hand quadrant, we would have people who would be distressed and disengaged. They may be depressed, they may need clinical interventions. As a coach, it may not be a space that I would necessarily be working with people in. However, I see a great deal, a large number of people in this quadrant, students at schools, executives, managers, leaders, people in all sorts of different workplaces who are actually functioning quite well, but their levels of well-being have really dipped down. They're actually not doing quite so well on that well-being front. Our languishing community are those people who are finding it really hard to sort of get that sense of positive emotion. They're not really getting it. And again, I'm sure many of us have come across clients and colleagues and friends and family members who are finding it hard to sort of get that sense of positivity. The plodders, as I like to call them, not meant to be pejorative particularly, but yep, happy, mental health well-being's high, it's good, but I'm not necessarily as stretched or engaged and challenged as I might be. Then we have our functioning community, and then of course the flourishes in this corner. It's very difficult to sustain our capacity to flourish. What I see are many people who have been flourishing, who then dip down below that bar into that distressed and functional space. And I think that's something we need to be talking more about these days is a word, I use the word coasting, but I've learned from my own perspective that I need to be able to take my foot off the pedal sometimes. What I need to be able to do is, rather than dip into that place where my well-being starts to be impacted, I need to give myself a bit of a break. And believe you me, as someone who loves positive psychology, it's very easy for us all to still fall into that place where our well-being can be undermined. Susie won't mind me telling you this at all, but when Susie Green finished at Sydney University, her farewell presentation focused on obsessive passion and harmonious passion, some of Robert Ballaran's work, and this idea that sometimes we are so passionate about what we do that actually it does start to undermine our well-being. So I think all of us need to take note of that ability to, or finding that ability to coast and take our foot off the pedal sometimes. My challenge to you would be to say, where do you sit on that matrix? Think about some of your clients, think about some of your team, your colleagues, your staff, your boss even. Where might they be? And it can be a really good starting point for a conversation around sort of where people might need to be building more on that capacity to build PERMA within their life. If you want to measure your well-being, a great measurement tool is the WOW. The website's on the screen here. This is a composite of a range of validated well-being measures, and it gives you a great report which will actually summarize your overall well-being and break it down into these various different domains. And again, it's a great tool as a starting point for a coaching conversation about where a coachee might want to focus on building their well-being. So that's another tool that you might be interested in using. Motivation for the work we do is really important. And what I've heard so many times over the last number of years is that, you know, we need to do more about well-being. We need to do more on positive psychology because of mental health problems and their potentially tragic consequences, which is arguably an avoid goal. So I just wanted to emphasize this idea that the approach way, I mean, as a coach, you know, part of our role is to help people to identify approach goals, things we're motivated to do, things we want to do. So I think it's really important that we always frame the work around positive psychology and coaching psychology in terms of how do we support people to be the best they can be, because it's good for us, it's good for everybody, rather than these are interventions to prevent stress, anxiety, and depression, as much as they can contribute to alleviating some of those problems. I'm not going to go into this slide particularly. A number of you will be familiar with what we call positive psychology interventions. Interventions that have been tested and have been shown through the research thus far to have an impact on well-being. And my argument here is that coaching sits nicely within those interventions. And there's a huge evidence base. It's getting stronger and stronger. Having been in Budapest and having been in Montreal last year, you come away so affirmed when you hear about some of the latest research. Lee Waters from the University of Melbourne was in Budapest, and she used the words around enhancing and protecting, that what positive psychology interventions do is enhance our capacity to be well, and as a result, protect us, buffer us against the risks of depression, anxiety, and stress. And that's a phrase I really like, and people seem to really relate to that one well. Coaching, my argument is a complementary partner to positive psychology. We can all read the book, we can all understand interventions, we can be introduced to all sorts of tools and tips and tricks. The reality is, do we do it? I mean, we talk about common sense principles, gratitude exercises, learning how to be more mindful. Of course, if we invest our time in these things, hopefully that will have an impact on our well-being. But we also know that many people don't apply common sense principles, and therefore coaching is a very powerful way to support people to change. John Whitmore's definition of coaching is the one I like to share with people: unlocking a person's potential, believing that people have the inner strengths to maximize their own performance, to take responsibility. They're helping them to learn rather than teaching them. So we're facilitating, we're enabling, we're giving them the space to take responsibility for themselves. Evidence-based coaching is a term you might hear used. This is a theme for a workshop that Angela and I will be running a bit later in the year. Evidence-based coaching is really the application of current research and best practice. So this is where it's so important to be up to date with what's actually happening at the moment. Fundamentally, it's around solution-focused and cognitive behavioral approaches, and it is recognized and seen as a positive psychology intervention in itself, which is sort of why the whole idea of positive psychology coaching can be so powerful. So what I would like to do for the last 25 minutes or so is to talk to you about PERMA-power coaching. And funnily enough, today sees the launch of this book, Positive Psychology Coaching and Practice, which has been edited by Dr. Susie Green and Professor Stephen Palmer, and within which I have a chapter called PERMA-power coaching, which I've co-authored with Daniela Filecki and Susie Green herself. So it's very fitting, I think, that this evening I have an opportunity just to share with you how we can use coaching to support this development of PERMA. So I'm going to start with emotions, the idea of positive emotions, but I want to just talk about emotions and the dark side. Itai Itzvan from University of East London did a great keynote in Budapest, and he talked about the dark side of positive psychology. And for those of you on the webinar who are familiar with positive psychology, you will know that positive psychology is not about being happy. It's not about always trying to be positive. It's about recognizing that anger and fear and anxiety and stress have a place. When we're being stretched, we're being challenged, clearly we're going to be in situations that we're going to experience some of what we call the more negative emotions. But we shouldn't be afraid of the negative emotions. They're there for a reason, and we're not trying to push them out the way. What we're trying to do is to help people to recognize that they exist, to be able to assess their situations, to ensure that these emotions are being used in the right way. Itai's presentation was beautiful. He talked about the Japanese art of kintsugi, which is where something is broken and it's mended with gold. And this is just an example of a dish that's been pulled together. And the idea is that things get broken, we get broken, but what happens is we get put back together again. And actually, we can be even more beautiful once we've actually been through some of the challenges and the adversities in life. And I think where this is important is I often ask people the question, tell me about yourself at your best. And not always, but very, very often, the response is an example of when they were most stretched and most challenged, when it was really difficult. It wasn't an easy ride. They often got bashed and battered and had to pick themselves up again afterwards, but they still recognized that they were pulling on resources and they were doing something fundamentally maybe good for the world, and that's something which they're particularly proud of. Having said that, it is important that we understand why we need to invest in our ability to experience more positive emotions. Barbara Fredrickson was very evident at the conference in Budapest. And for those of you who don't know, Barbara is pretty much the world's leader in research into positivity and positive emotion. And she talked again about her theory of broaden and build. which is that positive emotions broaden our capacity to be creative, to be innovative, to see the big picture, to learn, to grow, and also build our resources, our social resources. We have stronger relationships, our physical resources. We're physically stronger, our immune systems are stronger, our psychological resources, our intellectual resources. So there's a huge benefit for investing in more positivity. And we look at the top 10 positive emotions. And my little picture of the piggy bank is just to remind us that by investing in these emotions, what we're doing is we're having a reserve in place so that when the difficult times do happen, when we do fall out with people, when work gets particularly stressful, when something happens that's completely outside of our control, we've actually invested in some resources to help us to get through those difficult times. And the top 10 emotions are here: joy, inspiration, gratitude, hope, pride, serenity, amusement, curiosity, awe, and love. And my challenge to you is to think, how do you support your coachees? How do you support your team, the people around you, to experience more of these emotions? What can we do to help people to get a sense of inspiration, build a sense of gratitude despite some of the difficulties they might be challenging, create a space where they can feel more calm, more serene, have a laugh, recognize that interest and curiosity is an emotion, experience awe. How wonderful is that? And even ask yourselves the question, when was the last time I really felt I experienced that sense of awe? And pride is such an important one. We're not talking about hubris. Sometimes people sort of shun the idea of, it's not good to be proud, but actually, having an opportunity to reflect on what we have achieved, what we've done, it's so powerful. I work with people virtually every week who really in the workplace have been beaten and bashed about to the extent that they've actually sort of forgotten how fabulous they've actually been, and giving people permission to revisit their achievements, and that sense of pride can be so powerful. So helping people to become more optimistic, best self exercises, considering achievements, and gratitude exercises, just 3 ways that we can help to build more positivity in our clients. And again, no time to go into these in detail tonight, but certainly really worth exploring and reflecting on how you bring some of that positivity into your coaching practice. Okay, engagement. One of the key ways to support our ability to be engaged is by working to our strengths. Ryan Nymiek from the VIA Institute of Character did a fantastic keynote in Budapest too. And he talked about the 3 E's of strengths use, that they're essential. Our strengths are essential to us. They're core, they're part of who we are. They're more effortless. They're easier for us to use because they're more natural to us. And one of the key things is when we actually identify and work to our strengths, we get more energy from them. And that sense of flow, when, a bit like I'm having at the moment, when time just seems to sort of just fly past. And Ryan talked about a lot of the research that he's been leading personally through work through the VIA Institute, looking at the application of strengths in the workplace and in schools and in life. And it's so important because we know that strengths blindness exists. That I work with many people and I say to them, young people and older people, tell me about your strengths. And many people struggle to articulate their strengths, to recognize them. They're often taken for granted. They're obviously there, but people don't necessarily have a word or a vocabulary for them. So for those of you who are not familiar with the values and action character strengths, just a quick introduction. This tool has been recently revalidated. It's been around since around 2004, but there's been a recent revalidation of it over the last couple of years, and it's standing up absolutely firmly as a highly validated strengths assessment. 35 languages, 6 million people have been using it across the world, high validity, being used very widely across many different sectors, and it's free and it's available for both adults and young people. What the tool does, it identifies 24 character strengths, which it assesses on the basis of an online questionnaire. And from that, it ranks the character strengths. And the research tells us that the top 5 to 7, 5 is still seen as the key number, are likely to be what we would call our signature strengths, which are those which are most unique to us. These are the 24 character strengths. I just wanted to share with you my top 7: gratitude, love, appreciation of beauty and excellence, curiosity, kindness, hope, and zest. And I tell you what, in 2008, when I first did this survey, and I've done it 3 times since, and my top 7, 10 have pretty much stayed similar. You know, they're always up there. It was a real revelation to me, and it was so affirming to have actually realized that kindness and hope and gratitude and appreciation of excellence were core to who I was. And it just reaffirmed who I've been as a manager, who I've been as a leader, who I wanted to be in the future. And so I can honestly tell you that I try and be mindful of my strengths use on a daily basis. And I'm blessed that I'm in a position now where I can bring them to the fore and share them with other people. A quick story I was going to tell, which I'm not going to go into lots of detail about now because of time, was just about an elderly gentleman who took it upon himself when he retired to grow a fig on a very withered tree. He persevered, he was creative, he was hopeful, and when he finally got his fig, he gave it away because he was so generous. And the point of this was that the story was being told at his funeral. But the people he knew who worked him understood that these were some of his core character strengths. And the message is that why do we wait, sadly, until sometimes we die or people die to talk about their character? And even today, I work with a client, a woman who's been through quite a challenging time recently, very high profile, has had amazing career, and she will continue to have one. And we talked about her character strengths today. And her character strengths were bravery and judgment and honesty and appreciation of excellence and persistence and love. And she was so validated by this conversation when she was able to look at her achievements and see how her courage and how her integrity and how her willingness to tell people when they've done a good job, how these things had actually supported her in her work and her achievements. She found really quite a revelation. So that was just a real example today of that in practice. I'm going to have to skip ahead, I think, I'm afraid, because of time. So I'm going to just whiz this one through, because I want to talk about relationships. Relationships are key to our capacity to flourish. It's very hard to flourish on our own. And the research is broadly talking about the fact that we need to be mindful of the positivity to negativity ratio in our relationships with people. Jane Dutton from University of Michigan talks about high quality connections, where we engage people respectfully, where we focus on their needs, not just our own. We ask questions. We don't simply tell people what to do. We act with kindness. We support people. And the evidence suggests that when we build high quality connections, we get more thriving organizations. And I want to relate this back to coaching, because if you're a coach, I would argue that what we do as coaches is we do all of these things, that we are in the business of building high quality connections and supporting other people to understand what those connections mean. Another really powerful presentation in Budapest was from Barbara Fredrickson talking about positivity resonance, which is the momentary co-experiences where people share emotions, mutual care and concern, and actually get this synchrony in terms of their behavior and their physiology, heart beats start to match, etc. And the key point here was that when people experience more positivity resonance, it has impacts on their well-being. And again, I think from a coaching perspective, I think this is what we try to create with our clients, that we're actually hopefully generating these shared emotions, we're showing care and concern, and we're actually there being present with them. So I think, again, this is really interesting to think about in terms of our coaching practice. Meaning and accomplishment, just very quickly, some of you talked about if I was going to get coached, if you were going to be coached, being coached on your sense of meaning would be a choice for you. Tony Grant at University of Sydney, when I was studying with him, talked about Go West, and Go West was the sun setting on the horizon. And it acts as your fuzzy vision. It's about where you would like to be in the future. And often the closer you get to it, the further it moves away. But it acts as a guide, as a shining light for you. So I think a best possible self-exercise is something I use with my clients a great deal. Where would you like to be in the future? If you understand your values, if you understand your strengths, if you discover your strengths, what would you be doing if you were adding worth, living a life of meaning and purpose? How do we develop that sense of intrinsic motivation? I had a conversation with someone today, and this woman, it's a different client, and she's making decisions now to do what she wants to do, not what she feels she should do, not what she feels she has to do. Yeah, because she's recognizing for the next 20 years she wants to go out there and do something which is going to be really meaningful for her, and she's using coaching as a way of getting support for that, which is fantastic. What coaching can also do, of course, is help people to say, right, I got an idea about where I'd like to be. It's a fuzzy vision, but I can see a sense of direction. How am I going to get there? What do I need to do tomorrow? What do I need to do next week? And I'm just sharing with you now, again, a personal vision. This is my 5-year plan back in 2009 that acted as my fuzzy vision. And I can tell you, I have done something probably every single week that has led me towards trying to realize that vision. It's not by luck, it's by hard work, and it's by just sort of taking action, taking small steps. I'm sharing with you now my more recent 5-year plan, which was from 2015, end of 2015, when I moved from Australia back to London. And again, this is a bit of a guide for me in terms of what am I doing this week that might move me forward a little bit in any of these directions. And even doing the webinar tonight is actually serving that purpose. So again, I'm trying to share with you sort of my own practical experience of walking the talk, and using some of these principles myself, because then I feel far more empowered to use them with my coachees. So just finally, health foundations: diet, exercise, mindfulness, and sleep. Obviously very important. Headspace, if you haven't heard of Headspace, it's an amazing app, evidence-based, around mindfulness. And this is a fantastic resource, Smarts and Stamina, from Marie Jersey Shah and Catherine Britton. Looks at the link between sleep, exercise, food, and mood. So again, a couple of good resources there that, that I know that people find very, very helpful. So my argument is that coaching can build perma. And hopefully I've made that point at a very high level for you tonight, and maybe giving you some pointers for things that you'd like to take away and explore a little bit further. Outcomes from coaching studies, from evidence-based coaching studies, back up very much that coaching, when done well, can have a very positive impact on well-being, and also have this buffering effect against stress, anxiety, and depression, which is something which I'm sure we all want. So just quickly, using coaching to shift people around from that languishing into potentially flourishing spaces, using coaching to support those people who have flourished to get back up into that place where they belong and find ways to sustain that capacity in the future can be very powerful. So I'm going to finish with a very quick story about a project I was involved in Australia called the Helmsman Project, working with young people in year 9 on a coaching program to build self-regulation, resilience, and hope through coaching and ocean sailing. It was an amazing program to be involved in. A group of young men and a group of young women, had 2 cohorts of young people, took them out onto Sydney Harbour, and then after a range of individual and group coaching sessions, we then took them out for 5 days out into the ocean, basically, and had to live together on a Sydney Hobart yacht, which was very uncomfortable, but exhilarating experience, very, very challenging, homesickness, seasickness, all sorts of challenges, but such an amazing experience for those young people. Coach them on the boat, coach them off the boat, help them to understand their strengths, and importantly, one of the most fundamental parts of the program was to get those young people to think about, having had this experience, what do they want to do in the future? How are they going to use this experience to move themselves forward? Lessons that came out of that program, and lessons that I've taken with me ever since, have been quite fundamental, really. One lesson was that happy sales are not flappy sales. And I didn't know this before I took part in this program, but the reason sales are flappy is because they've got no wind in them, because the boat is sailing too close to the wind. And I think all of us are guilty sometimes, as coaches, as leaders, as managers, as parents, as colleagues, as friends. We're all guilty often of sailing too close to the wind and not giving ourselves the energy that we need in order to get to where we want to go. So what we need to do is to fill our sails, and by working to our strengths, by investing in our relationships, getting that sense of meaning and purpose, we're building that energy that will help us fundamentally get from A to B. The life jacket symbolizes that safety net, that by investing in our capacity to flourish, to be well, we're obviously hopefully more likely to float if we get if the boat capsizes, which it inevitably will. Another powerful learning was about the lifeboat, that one of the head teachers and one of the parents we worked with said that they felt stronger because of the experience of the young people, and that they were able to learn, they were able to be supported, they felt more supported themselves by the young people who've been through the voyage and the journey. So actually learning how to flourish yourself is not selfish, it's actually unselfish, because it means you're able then to support other people to see where they are. And then just lastly, this quote from this young woman, it was so really touched on the core of this, that she recognized that even the smallest changes can make the biggest difference. A small change in direction today, a tiny change in direction, can take you somewhere completely unexpected, that you're somewhere different from where you expected to be. And if you believe you can do that, then that's obviously very powerful. So small changes make big differences. And then lastly, this young man was one of the young people who actually had arrived in Australia by boat as a refugee. So his previous experience on boats had been as a refugee on a boat from Indonesia. And he was an amazing young person who wanted to be a nurse. And as far as I know, has absolutely thrived and is now beginning to study for his bachelor's of nursing. So I'm sure he would make a positive difference in the world. So coming back to my sailing analogy, what we're hoping to do is help people not to be afraid of the storms. The storms are always going to come, but they're going to develop some of these skills for navigating through them. So I'm going to hand over to Angela just for a moment to talk about November, and then I'll just wind up and say goodbye.
Thank you, Clive. That was great. We did just have one question in the chat box which needed clarifying, and that was the 20% flourishing figure a global figure?
Okay, it's an average global figure. Flourishing across populations in Europe, it was something like, the lowest was 6%. They looked at 23 European countries. The lowest was 6%, and the highest was around 26%, I believe. And Russia at that time had the lowest number of people flourishing across the population, and I think Denmark had the highest. The UK came in at about 19%, and I think the States comes in around 20%. So it's like an average figure, but it will vary. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, great, thank you. So as Clive mentioned, for anyone who is interested in exploring positive psychology and coaching further, we've got 2 upcoming workshops. The first is on November the 7th, entitled Driving Peak Performance, which is positive psychology and leadership coaching and the workplace. And then the second is on November the 8th, an introduction to evidence-based coaching. So I can send out details of those for anyone who is interested. And they're also on the ATD NYC website.
Okay, thank you very much, Angela. So anyway, so if you'd like to find out about what I'm up to, you can follow me on LinkedIn, Twitter, or YouTube. I'm very happy to link in with you. And if you do have any specific questions that if we don't have time to address many tonight, it seems now, so there's so much to cover. Please do get in touch with me. And what I'd like you to do, hopefully, is to stay afloat and flourish yourselves. And I'd like to thank Angela and David once again for the opportunity to talk to you all tonight. So thank you very much.